Hello, everyone. Welcome to the July 31st meeting of the now Jupyter IPython project. We have a new member of the team, Adrienne, who will be working with us on the sort of visual design, web, visual identity part of the project, where there's plenty for us to do. So I wanted to welcome Adrienne for those who haven't met her before. And the rest of the team are kind of the regulars who are here most every week. And let's get going with the agenda. I think, Thomas, you had said that you had sort of monopolized the agenda, so feel free to enjoy your monopoly.
Yes, the first thing is actually Matthias's entry.
Sorry, computer a little slow and new setup, so I'm kind of a little lost. So I tried to resubmit a PR that was done by someone else about fixing rewrite input in the notebook. But the thing is, like, rewrite input is not documented anywhere, and it's basically send this thing rewrote with already the little arrow in front of it that say, hey, I have rewritten it. So maybe at some point we should discuss writing the spec for that and knowing what we want for rewrite input and formalize that and do a nice documentation, API, checks that everything works, add that into the message spec.
Yeah, in general, of the, I don't know, 3 to 5 payloads we have, none of them are documented, and if they are, I think, well, no, I think one of them is documented, but not accurately. Yeah, I've been meaning to do kind of a whole pass on the idea of payloads, which I'm not convinced is one that should exist.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to
rewrite could certainly go over IOPub.
Yeah, and I don't know what to replace it with. But that's a bit, I think fixing it in this PR can be a small task, and we can see if we can do the whole thing over.
Yeah, and rewrite input is one of those kind of old hacks that was fairly clear what you wanted to do when you could make a lot of assumptions about being in the terminal and having complete control over the input-output loop in a direct synchronous way, and all of a sudden it gets a little murky, and we kind of carried it over as best we could to the Qt console and just kind of shoved it under the rug. So we need to clean it. Do we want to try to just finish this one up as is and leave the design of the payloads for post 3.0 because that seems like something that will require a bit more thinking that we maybe have bandwidth for right now.
I would say that you cannot finish the PR right now because you get something which has no sense on the payload. You get like ASCII escape things with arrow everywhere, and you probably don't want to fix it like that. You just want to like ignore it until
I think fix it should probably involve removing the ASCII escaped arrow.
Yeah,
because that's just wrong. That shouldn't be part of the message spec.
Yeah.
Well, it shouldn't be part of output either. But yeah. I still haven't seen anybody explain why they even want a rewrite input in the notebook at all.
I can see one use, which is equivalent to the load magic, but that load in the cell in which you call it. So basically, the problem with load is that you create a new cell and notebook are not reproducible. If you use a load that rewrite input, then you replace the cell and it's fine. That's the only reason I can see to use
We have talked about doing that actually with the load magic and things.
That's true.
I assume this was just because in the notebook you can literally do rewrite the input. So if somebody does an autocall expression or something, you can actually go back and change their code to.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the terminal, the rewrite, the reason for that was basically to give some feedback to the person of what actually got executed in case there's a bug, so that they're not guessing and trying to imagine, well, I wonder what is it between what I typed and what code got run, what happened, right? So giving a visual cue of that is kind of important. The question of whether, I'm not sure where I stand on the question of whether, because we can in the notebook now, we have enough control of the input area to flat out rewrite it and change it, whether we want to do that, because that will.
Looks like Fernando's got.
Fernando got frozen.
Whether instead we want a mechanism.
Fernando, do you think we heard the last minute of what you said?
We did not hear.
We did not. Yeah, you got stuck for a while. But yeah,
yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Ah, okay, so it wasn't muting. Oh, I see something funky with my network traffic. Okay, great. I was just saying that in the terminal, the feedback was necessary so that you could debug what it is that got executed depending on what you typed. I'm not sure that I know where I stand on the idea in the notebook of, do we want to simply provide an alternate feedback mechanism, or do we want to flat out overwrite the user's input, which we could do, but then that loses the original input that they actually typed, right?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that we necessarily want to do that as the default thing.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
UI in some ways, you type in a sort of simplified, convenient version of code, and it automatically changes it to the full, inserting what to do autocall.
So, yes, but do we want to show that? Do we want to simply offer a UI mechanism that shows you this is what is getting executed instead of what you typed, or
yeah,
do we want to?
I'm saying we may not do anything like, but maybe somebody wants to write an extension that does, rewrite yourselves, or maybe we want to have it as an option or something like that.
What code paths currently use this rewrite capability?
Autocall.
I think only the terminal. I don't even think, does even the Qt console, I don't think
it
even
doesn't
the
work
console
anywhere
does.
other than, it doesn't even work in the terminal front end. It doesn't work anywhere other than plain single process IPython. Has never worked anywhere.
And in that context, it's just autocall?
Not quite.
Autocall, we have a handful of different syntaxes for autocall for different quoting and separation rules and things.
I mean, I think one question we should think about is this an abstraction that we want to have and support across all languages? And it's not at all clear to me that that is the case. I mean, it seems like if we were to sit down to write a new kernel for a new language, we would never ever think of doing something like this.
Well, we have said other languages may want to introduce, convenience shortcuts akin to our, shell escapes and question mark help and things. So having some generic way to say, we have the code from what you have written, this is what is actually being executed, doesn't seem like an entirely ridiculous idea. And it's, if things don't want to use that, then you can just completely ignore it.
I would also say that it might be convenient to have something richer than pure text, because you might want to add indication for the users, like highlight what has been changed, or provide some mechanism to say, hey, basically you have an error here, I added automatically fix, I don't know what. So I think we should.
Let's not try to go down that rabbit hole at the moment. I mean.
Yeah, but maybe we don't want to think about rewrite input right now. Say, okay, it's broken, it's not used anywhere, just forget it and design something better later.
Yeah, because to answer Brian's question, I do think that some generic mechanism that basically says between what you typed and what is going to be considered input, there was a transformation. That completely that a hook at that level actually kind of makes complete sense in our patterns, which is to say to provide various points for the users to say what are the layers between what the person actually types at the keyboard and what happens in the execution.
But why? I guess what I'm wondering is not why does this need to be in the message spec rather than just telling people, if you write a function or class which does this, call print to display to the user anything that you want to display related to that transformation. Because all this does is print, right?
Well, it doesn't do anything at the moment.
Well, in the only case where it has ever worked, all it does is print.
Exactly.
But that doesn't use the message spec, so that's...
Yeah, no, basically we took all the stuff that happens as side effects and where messages didn't really make sense, we made them payloads. But that doesn't mean we actually made them payloads that we use. So if you want for instance, foo1 with autocall, if the one case where auto rewrite input is called, it shouldn't actually replace the text that you typed in the notebook. So basically the one place where this works, the one place where this is triggered currently, if it actually rewrote the cell, it would be doing it wrong.
Say that again. Why is that?
So right now we basically have this autocall machinery that's basically shorthand and lets you write function calls without parentheses. It seems wrong that if someone were writing that way in IPython, that we would change the input in their notebook.
I agree.
No, that's what I said. That I'm not convinced that we want to actually go back and change the input that they typed in place, right? Just because we can doesn't mean that we should do that.
And again, not as a default thing, but I could imagine that's an option making perfect sense. Like, you're typing a simplified subset of Python, and it's automatically rewriting that to valid Python. So the notebook that you save, you can then send to someone who doesn't have autocall turned on. It looks like valid Python, so you have that teaching advantage that you're not letting invalid Python pass silently.
Yeah, so to me, the quick fix for this is to remove auto rewrite input entirely and make it a print statement.
I agree.
And then we can. I think the rewriting input thing is a useful thing, but I think we can start from scratch with that idea and just come up with what we think it should be. Because the one case we have right now is probably not. It probably shouldn't do that.
And you mean make it a print statement kernel side?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean
I think for the simplicity of either simplifying the payload to not include the ANSI escape bit, or just putting in a simple message type for we have already PyIn, or they're not called PyIn anymore. We have already input broadcast messages that say what code has been submitted. Adding another message to broadcast.
You could add a key to
the version of that code.
You could add a key. So right now, in the IPython history, for instance, there's here's the code.
Raw and transformed.
The raw and transformed history. We could add a key to execute input or whatever PyIn got renamed to. That's so there's raw and transformed. This is what the user typed. This is what we actually ran.
There's a bit of because our auto rewrite input machinery distinguishes between things where we've allowed the user a convenience like autocall, and they should actually think about what's happening as the rewritten form of that, and things like magics where we actually want to kind of hide the details of how that's working.
But
I also think it's important that I have never seen someone other than someone like Fernando use autocall. And so
we know people use it because people, when it was more aggressive, people reported reported bugs about it, and that's why we toned it down. I mean, the thing is, at this point, some of these things have been in there in the kernel for so long, and we have users who have been doing these things for 10 years that I'm not too crazy about removing features that people may actually use.
No, I'm not suggesting we remove it, but I don't think it rises perhaps to the importance of putting something in the message spec right now related to it.
No. What I think we should do with the message spec is what Min was suggesting, that I do think that the notion of a point where the input, the raw input of the user may be transformed automatically, that's the kind of, those are hooks like pre-execution and post-execution hooks. That is a transformation that I think conceptually makes sense, and that makes sense across programming languages, right? And that, so that concept is a concept that I think makes sense in the design. The thing is, the current version of that is this gross hack, which was basically shove it under the rug in the payload stuff because we were in a hurry and there were too many things that needed to be put somewhere. It was like, just put it there and we'll think about it later. So I do agree that we could remove it completely from the message spec for now, and then what we should do is think, how do we encapsulate that hook, and where in the messaging do we express there was a difference between what the user typed and what actually was considered the input, so that difference can be represented, because the default representation could be, I don't know, in the notebook you may provide a little overlay or something where the user can, if they want, they can hover over an area and then you overlay the cell with a different overlay so that you can see it in and out. I don't know, I'm just making stuff up, but the point is that information could be presented in different ways to the user. Different kernels could make that functionality in different ways. You could imagine experimental kernels for languages where you define, I don't know, somebody wants to play with a natural language input syntax, for example, for queries. And you type a natural language query, and that gets automatically converted into code, and you want to have a way of seeing that. So I think that concept of that transformation makes complete sense as a generic part of the design. What doesn't make sense is the current implementation is crazy. So, and because the current implementation isn't even used, right, that we get those messages and we're not even doing anything with them, I'm totally okay with saying, let's take an aggressive approach here and even nuke things out if need be. But what I don't want to do is nuke the idea. I think the idea makes sense, and it does make sense across languages in a generic fashion.
Okay.
So do we go with that? Just take it out. Just take it out.
And replace it with print for now, where it's needed.
Yeah, take the current, because autocall is the only thing that uses it right now, as far as I can tell.
And I mean, since the clients right now don't even do anything with it, like none of the clients other than the
Yeah,
single.
it's strictly an improvement for the 8 people who use autocall in the notebook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now
And then we can start from scratch building what the, right, because load is the one that really makes the most sense to me, is the case where you do an action and it replaces your current cell with the new thing, and we can think from the very beginning of how that should work.
Yeah.
Without trying to update auto rewrite or whatever.
Yeah. I think that's the right approach.
Great.
Okay. Thomas.
So, kernel specs. At present, the first time that you use any of the 0MQ front ends on Python 2 or Python 3, it writes the kernel spec file for that version of Python, and then you can. It will appear in the drop-down menu. So the kernel for the version of Python you're currently using is always there, and that's a special case so that it runs on the same sys executable as the current front end. And if you have run any front ends for the other Python version, then that kernel will also be there. At the moment, we write it assuming that Python or Python 3 is on your path, so it can just be launched as Python-m whatever. There are cases where that doesn't work, like if you may have Python 3 installed as Python if you're on Arch. You may have Python installed but not on Path if you're on Windows. You may have different versions of Python in different environments, which also links in with the next point I have on the agenda. Do we want to think any more about when we write those kernel spec files and what we put in them?
So I'm not sure that I understood what the question is. Sorry.
So, like, if I'm habitually using Python 3, for instance, and I run a Python 2 notebook or I run the Qt console with Python 2 at some point, then it will add the Python 2 kernel spec. So until I do that, like, Python 2 will not appear in the drop-down list. When I run a Python 2 front end for the first time, it will add that to the installed kernel specs. So I will see, IPython Python 3 and IPython Python 2, and then no matter what I was running that with, it will just, when it tries to launch Python 2 kernel, it will just try to launch it with the command Python -m whatever. So it assumes that Python 2 is called Python, and it assumes that it's on path. It can't be inside a virtual end or something.
Didn't we have kind of the concept of decoupling the name of the kernel from the executable, the name of the...
The name of the kernel is decoupled, but when it writes the kernel spec, it writes the command that it will use to start that kernel.
I guess I hadn't realized, because I hadn't looked at the code, that this was done automatically when you started it, and that's what I'm not convinced is a good idea.
It's done when you create
that's what I'm
kernel spec.
asking about.
But yeah, I mean, it seems to me like maybe what we should do is new kernels need to be installed with a manual step where you do some action.
All the other kernels, that is the case. Our own kernel.
So the question is, should you need to install the IPython kernel to get anything to work at all?
Or at least, yeah.
Brian's muted.
Brian, you're muted.
I mean, I guess the way I would look at it is when someone installs the first version of IPython that has this support, it is at that point that we should install the kernel spec for the kernel that runs under that version of IPython.
So you do it at install time.
I mean,
that would mean that we cannot use wheels.
Yeah.
Because
wheels can't run code at install time. It's part of the point of them. You can't do things at
but can they put? But they can put things in different parts in the file system, can they?
Yes, but you can't know where in the file system that is, and you can't decide where in the file system that is.
You can, as far as I know, you can only put things in your site packages directory for packages, your bin directory for scripts, and some arbitrary data directory.
So let's phrase it a different way. 5 years from now, we have written everything for the notebook server in Node.js, and when the notebook starts, it starts a Node.js process. It will need to look up the kernel spec for the IPython kernel.
Yeah.
And the only way that that has been installed is using standard Python packaging things. How does that find out about that kernel?
Well, with current Python packaging standards, it can't be done. You have to run that's just a fact, right?
I mean, with my Bash kernel, I have a kind of gross hack around distutils and setup tools that does manage to install it.
Right,
But that means that the Bash kernel, I cannot put a wheel for it up on PyPI because that step would not work with wheels.
Yeah, if you want to run code as part of the install process, you have to not use wheels. Because one of the security features of wheels is that no code runs as a part of the install process.
But I mean, I'm fine with that. But the less than ideal part is that it has no way of installing resources elsewhere. I mean, that's.
But it can still put them into standard site packages things, and we just need to change our code to look there, right? We can still make it work with wheels, and for the kernel specs that we ship.
Then that means that there has to be a Python specific look in Python site packages. The hypothetical Node.js notebook server has to know enough about Python to look in its site packages, but about different versions of Python.
I think this is going to be right now when these kernels are written in your IPython directory. So let's pretend for now that IPython is a third-party kernel, or let's just call it a Jupyter notebook server or whatever.
Yeah.
There is a user place, the .jupyter directory with kernels in it. You need to be able to trash that and get your kernels back without having to reinstall from scratch. So doing it at install time, at the very least, cannot be the only way. So the normal install process of anything with packages like wheels might be 2 steps. You get the code, and then you tell the notebook server about the code.
Yeah, and like for the R kernel, for instance, because R packages, as far as I'm aware, have a similar thing. You can't run arbitrary code at install time. I have a separate step of you install this package and then you call IR kernel install spec, and it puts its spec in the correct place. And
yes.
That's simplified by the fact that in R you install packages from R rather than from a shell command line.
So I'm just thinking about hacks, trying to build abstractions that won't have these limitations. Could we tell the kernels when they install themselves that they need to ship an executable that is installed somewhere in the user's path, and we will call that executable, and it will return us the name of the directory that has the kernel spec? Because
how do we find out what that executable is called? I mean, you have a registration step somewhere so that we can discover these things, and the kernel specs are that registration step.
The dumbest registration possible is what Git does, and that's commands that start with git hyphen.
No, and that's what inspired me to think this way.
There are kind of registration by convention type things. I don't actually know how you discover those. Is there normally even a way to discover them?
R being R, as far as I can tell, you can't actually install an executable thing with your package. There's no equivalent to scripts because R doesn't really have scripts.
So we're getting a little far away from the original question, I think, if I remember what I don't remember what the question was. I think for installation processes that making a kernel available to the notebook in general is a two-step process. You get the thing and you tell the server about it. And for certain installation processes, the getting the thing might imply telling, right? If you're doing the Python assist, for example, if you Python assist, for example, you can do registration as a part of install. But for Python wheel, you can't. For R, you can't. So I think that's just going to be the case, at least for a while. And if you install with apps, they'll put it in user share, and that's fine.
Can Conda run code, or does Conda work like pip with wheels?
Conda looks like wheels, but you can put files in arbitrary directories.
Yes.
Because it's a
But
complete packaging format, not just a Python packaging format.
We don't look in prefix share, but we probably should, or something.
It might, yeah.
But we
put files
basically
in arbitrary directories, it might not work.
Yeah. So yeah, there are some little things that we can work on in terms of what a system installed kernel is, and right now I think we hard code user share and user local share. But Conda would put it in like Conda prefix share. But that would be easy to support. So Conda wouldn't have this problem.
Yeah,
Yes, anything with a sane package manager.
Yeah, apt wouldn't have this problem. Conda wouldn't have this problem. It's only the language-specific things that don't really support anything other than making code importable. And I mean, it's even debatable whether they make code executable, because Python often installs things that aren't on your path, depending on configuration and all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, in general, I think it's not a good idea to install things behind the scenes when a user fires up a kernel. I think install should be separate from the running of kernels and the notebook server. I don't know how we do that, but
Yeah, that was also my first intuition that we now that I guess the first thing to do would be when you install IPython, you should definitely get a kernel with IPython, but I think it should be the kernel, just the default kernel for the version of Python that you installed it for. So
which is exactly how it works right now.
What's that?
Which is exactly how it works right now. It's just that if you do that once with Python 3, then the next time you start Python 2, you have Python 3 available. Because you're like, I started IPython. With this Python, there is unambiguously a kernel associated with the Python I'm running the server.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have it, create the little spec file. That's what happens right now. And the issue, the artifact of this is that if you start with the way it writes it different for Python 2 and Python 3. So if you start IPython with Python 3, you're like, oh, I'm Python 3, I know how to write my own kernel, I run it in Python 3, I'm all set. But then you start it in Python 2, it says, oh, I'm Python 2, I know how to write I know who I am, I write that spec, now I have two kernels, Python 2 and Python 3. And I think it would be perfectly sensible if the notebook became a totally other thing, the Node.js server, God forbid, then it would be appropriate for IPython to behave just like all of the other third-party kernels, which have to explicitly tell the server about itself. But in this case, because it's one package, we can do the tell step implicitly if it hasn't already been done.
So can we write maybe in a wiki page or an issue or somewhere sort of the, I mean, I guess my concern is that Python is not the only language that has a messed up, weird, idiosyncratic packaging system. I mean,
a language that doesn't.
Yeah, we like to.
Node.js is not it.
Yeah, Node.js is, if anything, worse than Python.
Yeah, but I think it would be nice to have a sense of like what are our options even that can really work across all programming languages, and what, yeah, because
Brian, I think you're being a little bit optimistic. Our options that can work cleanly across all programming languages
are do IPython install NV extension or install.
So IPython is the collection of gross hacks that we're going. What is the collection of gross hacks that we're going to have to pile on top of each other so that this thing survives in the union of many programming languages? Is what you were trying to say, right?
Exactly. I haven't had enough coffee yet. I'm sorry.
I mean,
wouldn't the packaging, the concept problem of the IPython be solved once the notebook is a separate package? Because then, if you only install Jupyter notebook, then the IPython kernel cannot be registered because it doesn't exist, it's not installed. But if you install IPython, then it requires Jupyter, and then at the same time it registers itself. So it's just a question of separating the notebook, and once it's in this package, it won't have to register.
I don't think that makes this any easier because you still have the limitations of Python packaging that you can't release.
So this problem has so many moving parts that I'm going to go with Brian's suggestion that we jot down kind of in a wiki or in a page on the wiki or somewhere kind of the various constraints, and we spin once more on this. There's too many moving parts, and I'm honestly, my head is getting a little lost with exactly how to make a decision against all these constraints. So I'd want to kind of have a little summary somewhere and go back over them.
Well,
or is that
for kernels in general? I think the only answer that we can really provide is that if you install with language-specific tools, then there has to be a separate step to install the kernel spec. That is, I think, perfectly reasonable. That's what I've already got for the R kernel. But I don't think that experience is, you shouldn't have to install IPython notebook and then do some weird incantation before it's possible to do anything with it.
Well, but I think the two statements you just made conflict in the sense you're saying you should do something separate, but you should never have to do something separate.
No, you should do something separate for kernels in general. For the IPython kernel in specific, I think it is a sufficiently special case that you should not have to pip install IPython notebook and then IPython install kernel before you can run the notebook.
Yeah, and you may when the notebook gets separated from the kernels, we may introduce a need for a step like that, depending on how our dependencies work. When the IPython kernel becomes more of a peer with the other kernels.
what noise?
That's the ball. So when IPython becomes more of a peer to the other kernels, it may need this. The IPython kernel may need this extra step to tell the notebook server that it exists, and that's fine. The issue is that right now they're the same package, so it makes no sense for a package to have to tell itself about itself.
Yes.
So I think it's fine.
But I think my point is that if it's so bad for the IPython kernel for users to have to do a separate step, then it's equally bad for any other kernel.
We're not saying it's so bad. We're saying it's pointless to pretend we don't know. We're not saying it's this horrible, awful experience. What we're saying is the experience of IPython not knowing about the Julia kernel, and it's like, oh, let me look at the iJulia docs. How do I tell IPython about the iJulia kernel? Right now, the experience would be, oh, I don't have a kernel. How do I tell IPython about the IPython kernel? The fact that they're the same thing is the entire source of the horribleness. How do I tell Jupyter about IPython? That's a reasonable question. How do I tell IPython about IPython is not a reasonable question. Yeah.
But I guess the way that I would put it is that, but then why do we pretend that we don't know how to look up if there's an R kernel installed?
We don't.
Can't we run something at the command line that does something like r-m import kernel?
For the R kernel in specific, yes, but can we, I mean, we would have to then have machinery. We already have like, what, 15, 20 kernels? Are we going to have machinery that does r-m, is there an R kernel installed? Julia whatever, is there a Julia kernel installed?
But I guess my point is, if
Like
we're
or
going to
not,
treat
for the moment, the IPython kernel is a special case. It's the one that's guaranteed to be
that's just
installed
a
when
fact.
you install IPython.
I know, but
And it'll stop, at some point, it will probably stop being the case.
But that
But I
point
think
is,
pretending it's not a special case right now would just be incredibly annoying.
yeah. No,
Because
I don't disagree with that, but I don't want us to come up with something that basically treats the other languages as true second-class citizens from the beginning. And
well, I mean, to some extent, they already are, because when you pip install IPython, you only get one kernel. You have to then go and do other stuff in another language's packaging system to get another kernel installed. And that's the way it works.
yeah, I don't see any issue there. And we can
We could make everybody second-class citizens. I don't think that helps.
yeah, if someone starts so if we with wheels we're telling the server about the IPython kernel is an explicit step. So get IPython and tell Jupyter about it is pip install IPython kernel, Jupyter register kernel IPython whatever. If that's how you get the IPython kernel, and then we artificially say, well, these are really separate projects that happen to be in one package, and then someone opens the notebook and says, oh, I don't have any kernels, and then they open a bug report saying, how do I install the kernel? And like, oh, you have to tell us to tell ourselves about ourselves, just because we want to make sure that the IPython experience is exactly the same as the iJulia experience, even though it is impossible for there to be any ambiguity about what's going on here.
yeah.
It would
but
mean that
imagine-
if you did pip install IPython notebook, you clicked new notebook, then it would display some sort of message saying, I cannot start any kernels.
But imagine someone who only installs an R kernel and never wants to run a Python kernel. You're describing their user experience.
Yeah, and it's possible. They only want to install the R kernel, so they install the R kernel. They tell the server about it. Like it's a totally reasonable thing, even if they're in the same language. It's a totally reasonable thing if they're separate packages. So like I think the explicit tell the server about it step is something that we should at least consider requiring for IPython when they're separate packages, and make it totally, Brian's muted again, and make it totally the same experience for IPython and everything else. Okay. I just think it doesn't make sense while they're the exact same package, and it may or may not make sense if the server depending on where code lives. it may make sense to still give IPython a little bit of special treatment if there's a dependency. But maybe not. Maybe we, even though we could in that case, we could still skip it and say you need to tell the notebook server about IPython. I think that would be totally fine as long as they're separate packages. I just think it's not appropriate to tell a package about itself.
Yeah, I agree that right now, I mean, we do want to make the machinery as kind of uniform across languages as possible, but we shouldn't artificially make it worse for one particular case where we'd have all the information just to make it on par with the others. So in a scenario where we have all the information and it is what makes sense, we shouldn't say, well, in order for this to be like the others, which can't have the same experience, we're going to cripple this one artificially. That I think is just not sensible. Sort of there's an element of practicality over purity there that says, well, yes, I mean, sort of the purity argument is they should all be reasonably kind of equal class citizens, and we're doing everything we can to make all languages the same. But the reality is this is just one package, and it's all implemented in the same language, so it knows about itself. We shouldn't. Their practicality wins over purity, and we shouldn't say now we're going to artificially break it and force people to manually fix something that wasn't broken in the first place because we have a hypothetical argument of purity and equality across languages. That I think just doesn't make any sense.
But I agree with that, but I think having a Python 3 IPython kernel install itself at runtime so that the Python 2 IPython notebook server can use it is going too far.
Yes, I actually think
it should never write any files. It should only use itself in memory.
It should know how to use itself. That's, I think, I'm fine with that. But I think yeah.
Is it possible to add a kernel to the list without it coming from the file system?
Yeah, should be.
Yeah. Okay, so basically don't write. The only thing to remove is the step where we write the current kernel to a file.
Yeah, I think that the notion of auto, I also don't like the auto, kind of the magic auto writing of that. I think the step where a kernel is sort of installed on disk, that step should happen always because of a manual action of someone.
Exactly. Yeah,
and the person should know whether they're taking that action to write that in their home, in their local user installation, or whether they're doing it, for example, with sudo to do it in a system-wide location. And that should always be a manual step. And simply to say that when you're running in process, the package knows that it itself has its own pieces and it can use itself, then that should be a consequence of all of it being in one library, and it can do runtime auto discovery and whatnot. But I also think that it shouldn't. The auto writing to disk does bother me quite a bit.
+1.
Sure. Seems reasonable, Thomas.
I think it's reasonable for us to have hard-coded things while the two packages are together, while the kernel and the notebook ship together. Hard-coding things, totally fine.
Okay, so just
hard-coded
remove writing to disk. That's the only change to make. Don't write to disk.
Hard-coded in memory, kind of, or hard-coded in the structure of the behavior of the code, rather than hard-coded on disk.
Okay.
I'm going to have to step out for a minute. I'll be back.
Is kernel spec environment a separate thing?
Yes.
All right.
Yes, you've had nearly an hour of discussion about this already. Now prepare for... So...
Actually, I propose that we do the content service first, just to give us like a 30-second break.
Second.
Can I merge it?
Second that motion.
Next bullet point. Can I merge it?
Yes, I think you can merge it.
Okay. All right.
All right.
You can take 30 seconds.
Exactly.
I have to write the timestamp.
All right.
Okay, so kernel specs we have designed largely for different languages, but we have already talked about the possibility of, writing a kernel spec for different virtual environments, different contra environments. Aaron Armandia is interested in doing them with different hash disks, whatever hash disk things are called. No doubt other languages have concepts of isolation. Then there's system level isolation, like Docker and virtual machines and things. And you could even extend the notion to, you know, kernels running on a different physical machine. And technically there's no reason why you couldn't write a kernel spec for each of these, kernel spec for every environment, every hash dist environment, every Docker container, etc. that you want to run a kernel in, but it's going to get long, and you know the UI is going to get awkward. The namespace of kernel specs is going to get horribly cluttered. To introduce some notion either now or in some future release of kernels in environments. So, you know, you can say, I want to start the Python 3 kernel in my whatever Conda environment, or you know, I want to launch the kernel from this hash dist environment.
I do think that's important. I think the engineering of it is probably more complex than we want to attempt in the current dev meeting. Do you have some ideas on how we might do that, or?
Not exactly, no.
Oh, good. This will be easy. Fun. How difficult is it to get this with just specifying the profile directory, or whatever, the .ipython.jupyter directory? I mean, I feel like you can get a lot of this by forcing the condas and the hash disks to just create new .ipython directories that you specify, so that you're using the notebook server that you installed in your environment, and then
yes, I mean, you can always completely reinstall IPython and start a separate notebook server.
No, but that's not what I said. That's not what I said. You use the notebook server that you have, but you specify the .ipython directory as point the sort of the home, the IPython home directory, as being inside of hashdist, or as being inside of a Conda environment or whatever.
The other alternative is that we have the option to look at an environment variable that has a colon-separated list of directories, and those different environments can set that environment variable. But either that approach or the profile directory assumes that there's an easy way for those other environments to install the kernel specs in those alternate locations.
I would say the opposite. You just fill in all the kernel spec in the same place, and then you can provide a way to organize them. So like key value pairs or nested dict or whatever, and with a special argument which is stars and which is all the rest. So basically, you always have all the kernels notebook knows about, and if you want to have an organized UI, you can organize it maybe with a nice dashboard or whatever. But the laying out of the different kernel, or the whitelisting or the blacklisting, should be completely separate from the way you install kernel spec.
But is that even possible?
Yes.
I mean, if I have 5 Conda environments, all that have Python 2 and Python 3 kernels installed, the kernel specs for each of those environments are going to be different. And right now they're installed in one global location, and the last environment created will overwrite the previously installed kernel specs.
You would have to give them different names, like, you know, conda n dash name dash Python 2.
Yeah, your kernel wouldn't be your Python 2 kernel. It would be your Conda Science Work 7 kernel, or it would be right, because you could have 100 Python 2 kernels, but you'd only call give them all different names. That's how you have them at the same time. Because the display name should describe everything that's unique about that kernel, not just the language.
Okay.
Right. So I would have my testing IPython stable or whatever. I would have my old IPython kernel or my virtual env that doesn't have Qt kernel.
Is it possible in a single command that can be put into the kernel spec to change to a particular conda environment and start the kernel in that environment?
So if you set, is there an env key in the kernel spec?
Yeah.
Then yes. So you just or I guess there isn't an update, right? Because you'd want a prepend path rather than clobber path. But if modulo inserting at the front of the path instead of appending to the end, then yes.
Okay, because
you can run a bash script to start a kernel, so nothing prevents commands that start a kernel to be a bash script that prepend something and that starts the kernel.
Yeah,
that is strictly true. You can.
Yeah. You need to be careful about signals, but yeah. Because if you kill that bash script, it's not going to kill the kernel, or it might not kill the kernel unless you're careful.
Okay.
But you could also do it with a Python script.
Yeah, there are disadvantages, but in general, yeah, it can be arbitrary shellcode.
Yeah, and I guess the underlying question I meant to ask was, do we want to allow a single running notebook server to start kernels in different environments? Or do we want the user to have to switch actual notebook servers to those environments as well?
So under at least with Python, you don't actually need the path. If you just use the executable in the environment, you don't need to activate it. You only need to activate it to get other executables. So for the vast majority of cases, just hard coding the executable is all you need for a conda environment or a virtual env.
Okay, no, that's great.
It's not perfect because, like, if you have pandoc or something installed in the conda environment, it's probably not going to be on the path in the kernel, but that's a relatively minor difference.
And we can probably work out ways to handle that.
So do you want to write up some proposals somewhere and figure out sort of what the next steps are, or do you feel like this is enough to sort of at least get started on it? Bye, Kyle.
No, I was really thinking of this as I think we should, as Fernando's fond of saying, start a background thread to think about it.
Great.
I'm not convinced that the write a new kernel spec for every environment you have is the right way to go about it.
Yeah, that's an easy way to do it with what we have already. But
can I also ask that people, you guys write down the thoughts into the notes as we go along? Because I start writing some of them down, but inevitably as I start writing, I'm missing whatever else is being covered. So I just like, we've had discussions today that I don't think I captured everything, and that sort of goes for previous items as well. If you see anything that wasn't captured there, that's worth just so this does become a background thread that we can sort of resume as opposed to restart.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, good point.
Okay. So NB format 4.
I started looking at it, man. It's a huge freaking patch.
It's not. So I rebased it on contents just because I knew I was going to, and I had time to do the rebase. So it's actually smaller.
Okay.
There's a comment in the PR about that. So it'll get smaller. It is a pretty big patch, but so one of the things we're figuring out for how to do NB format 4 better than 3 is the experience of backward compatibility, is being both backporting NB format 4 to 2.x and providing upgrade UI, and also implementing better UI for downgrade in 3. And so I think it's just worth kind of figuring out what we want that to be. Do we want like a save v3 copy button in the notebook UI? I did in the PR right now. You can do NB convert to notebook to notebook, NB format equals 2, and it will downgrade a v4 notebook to a v2 notebook.
Okay, so we have the NB convert capability implemented.
Yeah. So if that's all we need, then that's done. I don't know if we want GUI, if we want a button, if we want to be able to do it automatically, that kind of stuff.
I guess my thought is that down converting like that should be exceptional. We really want to encourage people to upgrade their notebooks as soon as possible, and so that having them do it in NB convert is a reasonable ask.
Well, upgrade is not optional. When you open it, it's upgraded.
Right, but I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so and NB convert is sensible, because before this, the only way to downgrade is to load a notebook and then from NB format .v3 import writes JSON something.
What do other people think?
Everybody just burned out from the long week.
No, that makes sense to me. That makes sense to me. Yeah, I'm fine with not having a GUI for it. I mean, it's always with custom JS. It's always easy for somebody that wants it to add it in themselves. So if somebody that finds themselves constantly downgrading notebooks from the GUI can do that.
So would you just implement it as a custom NB convert writer then?
No, it's not a writer. It's the notebook exporter.
Mm-hmm.
I just added in, so the commit.
It just has a flag, a traitlet that you can set the right.
Yeah, it's just the NB format version. So there was.
That's right, because we have an API that's really high level, right? And you can just pass in the.
Yeah, so there's every NB format version. That's the wrong PR. Sorry. Whatever. But yeah, so the notebook exporter, which returns a string. The notebook exporter takes an NB format argument. So the way it worked right now was it did NB format current writes, and what it does instead is NB format, and then I added an argument to writes in current that takes a version. So you can do NB format.current.writes version equals 3.
Got it.
And so it just passes that through. So it's pretty simple. Okay, that needs lots of review, and because it's a new NB format. The validation is there. The validation that Matthias and Jess did has been extremely useful in getting it to be reducing the amount of information lost and bugs introduced, because I could validate all the stuff as I was writing it, which was really nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there are some changes to the format that I think haven't been discussed, like stream output. A stream message has the keys name and data, and a stream output in the file format has the keys stream and text. And there's no reason for them to be different.
Okay.
So what I did was, because this is a PR on NB format, is I made the file format the same as the message, but we can, since we are updating message spec as well, we could change the message to be the same as the file format. Do people have thoughts on that? There are more people writing I think there are more kernel authors than there are
Document authors.
the main thing this affects is NB convert customization.
Yeah.
If you're changing, and only people who are actually changing how stream output looks.
Yeah.
So I went with the don't change the notebook format rather than the message spec. It's probably not what I would do if I were designing it from scratch, because I think name and data are not the best. I would probably use name and text if I were designing it from scratch, but that's changing both.
I mean, I'm fine with that. At the same time, this release is a great release to make changes to both the kernel spec, the message spec, and the notebook doc. So
Yeah.
Either way, I think is really fine.
Yeah,
We're breaking everything else, so might as well.
Yeah, well, and the kernel spec, so the kernel spec stuff has adapters. So if you're writing to the old kernel spec, it works just fine.
Do you mean message spec?
Yes. Yeah, if you're writing a kernel against the old message spec, it works with IPython master with the new message spec.
Great.
At least as far as I know. Supposedly. In my tests, anyway.
Our kernel works using the old.
this is going to be, yes, we've had other kernels, but this is going to be the first release where there's kind of an official way to do other kernels, and we have changed we've been changing the message spec quite a bit based on that feedback. So I would say that this is still fair game for changes to the message spec.
No, since we're changing both the notebook format and the message spec, I think it would be okay if people feel to change both. I don't have a problem with that. It's just,
I think so. The bar on those is going to get a lot higher pretty soon. So enjoy it while it's slow.
So do people have, given the, so there's the name of the stream and the content of the, the text data arriving on that stream. Do people have strong feelings? Name or stream? I think stream is bad. Text or data?
We're running way late on time. Let's not have a naming discussion on live.
Okay.
We know how those go.
Yeah, so basically that's, once I merge the, things went wonky. Once I merge contents, then that will be ready for lots and lots of review, and I won't be around most of the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
Okay, moving on.
So I think the next.
We're not going to make it through today. That's for sure. The agenda is huge.
We're gonna make it. We're gonna make it. It's just that the agenda is not gonna get finished, but we're gonna make it. I don't plan to die or anything by the end of the day.
So quite a bit of the later part of the agenda is pull requests that need edition. So if we don't get to them, then please somebody, or everybody, go and look at them, and if it's your area of competence, then make a decision on it.
Okay. So 6235, is that quick?
Which one is that?
Does it need discussion?
Wait, use require for widget common targets was the next agenda.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, that's so I thought we'd got this one sorted out. This is the rather than have loading things which register widget or common targets, and then when you create those widgets and comms, it's. I wanted to have the widgets and comms specify their modules and name, that we can do the JavaScript equivalent of when something is specified, import it and use it rather than import and register it sometime previously, because with the async stuff that's complicated. It got discussed some more at SciPy. Currently interested in writing tens for widgets. I think that's only available for like the small set of widgets that we ship, because third-party widget authors are going to write custom HTML and JavaScript to implement the front end of their own widgets. But people didn't want widget specifications to rely on JavaScript paths.
Yeah, I mean,
wasn't one of the problems that we were having was that we had to decide whether or not we wanted a separate. So there's the path to the file, and then the actual class that's being defined that needs to be registered, right? And so we were trying to decide if we wanted this weird notation where we would have like a dot or a colon and a class name, or have two separate traits, or
yeah, but that's really a minor and largely orthogonal point, is whether we stuff these two pieces of information into one string or put them in two separate strings. That one's not really important.
Yeah. So I feel like with widget stuff now, and especially with this one, it would be good to have Jason and Sylvan's input. Can Thomas, John, you two sort of coordinate with Sylvan and Jason to talk about this and make the decision? Because I feel like they've thought way more than I have about these type of things. And
so yeah, we trying to like discussion the IPython at large.
Sorry. Thomas is talking.
Well, yeah, when you type, he starts to speak Morse code.
Yeah. So we had a discussion with them at SciPy, and now I'm trying to like fold that discussion back into the IPython team discussion. The kind of compromise that we would keep the registry and put our own things in the registry so that you could create them with just a name, and then other things would alternative widgets anyway.
I'm actually not hearing much of what you're saying.
Yeah, I lost what you said.
Min, you may have to really stop typing rather than just doing it quietly. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, okay. The rough compromise that we reached was that we would leave the registry in place rather than removing it as we previously thought, and our own widgets would be put in the registries they could be used without require, and third-party widgets would be able to specify a require module which would be loaded as the widget was instantiated.
Yeah, if it wasn't found in the registry, then it would try to require, right?
The way I was thinking of it was if there isn't a module specified, then it would look in the registry.
Okay, the other way around.
Yeah.
I thought that part of the idea is that we really wanted to get rid of the registry to make embedding widgets and iframes easier. What do you think about that aspect of it, John? I mean, you've tried the iframe embedding now.
That's not. I don't think that's a problem, because all the iframes have handles to the widget manager, right?
Right. We figured that out.
Yeah.
And so the other option is to have our own widgets use require, but we put in shims to give them sort of
Nice names.
nicer names.
Well, I mean, there are various options, but they all basically boil down to there has to be some sort of global-ish namespace which refers to our own widgets, whether we call that a registry or require shims or just putting them actually in a global namespace was another thing that we contemplated.
Yeah.
I like that compromise that we came up with.
I think there's a chance that eventually our widgets would be a separate package. And so I guess I'm a little hesitant to treat our widgets somehow as being special.
I mean, they're not special. I mean, anyone could register. If we had whatever global registry, anybody could put things into it. But I mean, practically the only things that I would expect authors of other front ends to re-implement are our sliders and checkboxes and things. They're not going to or at least I'd rather doubt that they're going to re-implement things like map widgets and turtle widgets and things.
Again, I feel like it would be useful to have a live Jason and/or Sylvan on the line here. I mean, I know Jason is listening, but it's. I mean.
Can we maybe try to schedule this for
Yeah, we should probably move on.
When both of them can make it, and see if they can put on their schedule when Sylvan is back, and if Jason and him can plan.
Or just at another time. I mean,
or set up a meeting to talk about this. Yeah. Jason, you can type into HipChat. Would that be okay with you guys? Maybe when Sylvan gets back. Yeah, because it seems like we're not going to make a whole lot of progress right now on this. And I did want to have a quick, because we're already at an hour and a half. I know there's still a bunch down in the agenda, but I did want to do a quick check. Do we? Oh no, Jason, I didn't mean today. I meant to schedule for maybe next week or the week after a time when you and Sylvan could be available, perhaps. We weren't trying to kind of cram you in right now at the last minute. So what I wanted to check is whether there's Brian and Adrian, anything that you wanted Adrian to have a chance to participate in today. And Adrian, I'm not trying to put you on the spotlight. It's your first time, and it's totally okay if you just want to kind of catch up and listen in. But if there was anything on that topic, I don't want to leave it to tail off. I would for the whole agenda today.
Yeah, I think the only thing is she's been working on the logo. I've added some other websites to the design brief of basically different websites that I've found that I like certain aspects of their design, and this is on the wiki of the Jupyter/design repo. And if it would be great if other people have sort of their favorite logos or their favorite websites with design ideas, if you could post those there. That I think that's one of the most sort of important input thing that we can provide to the design process. Adrian also asked how tied we are to a capital J in Jupyter. I said, in a logo, potentially, I think we're open to it not being capital J, but I at least wanted to bring that up with everyone.
Yeah, Adrian, what are your thoughts on that? Is it because you have strong preferences not to, or just to know whether kind of the field is open?
Mostly just to see where you guys are at with it. I mean, I've been playing around with ideas with both, so I just wanted to see if there was something that you guys were leaning towards more, so that I could take that into consideration. But yeah.
Not strongly. I'm not. I think I'm personally a little bit traditional in that I don't see the problem with kind of standard capitalization rules for nouns. So yeah. I tend not to push sort of the removal of caps everywhere. But at the same time, if it happens to work really a lot better in lowercase, I could live with that. I have a slight preference for keeping the capital.
Okay.
But the title could be a planet, right? I mean, it's circular, and it could be Jupiter right there.
It's true.
Adrian, is there anything else that you'd like to maybe either ask us, or do you have any thoughts or anything else that you'd like to bring up? I just want to make sure that we give you a chance to pitch in, because today's meeting seems to be a little crazy on material, and we don't want to steamroll you completely. That's not the most welcoming way to bring you into the project.
No, it was interesting to be able to hear this side of stuff. But yeah, I mean, kind of what Brian was saying, just in terms of what you guys could do to help me out, would just be giving some ideas of directions that you guys like, and yeah, stuff like that would be helpful. But yeah, I've just been working on as many ideas as I possibly can, and then I'll start posting those for feedback.
Okay, awesome. And don't hesitate to pitch in either on HipChat or on the mailing list with with these things, and we're kind of, you know where to find everyone.
Yes.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm gonna have to leave soon, and I don't know how far you guys want to drag it, but I have about 10 minutes that I can be in, but I can bail out, and people can continue until you guys drop dead. So let's keep going.
So I actually have one meta issue that would, I think, help code review. So this is down towards the bottom on GitHub PR labels.
Mm-hmm.
So yay, GitHub for fixing and improving the filtering and labels for pull requests and issues. So we now have needs review and waiting for author. We have every possible combination of styles for our labels, ranging from dashes and spaces and every possible capitalization scheme. I don't think we have the patience to decide on one unified scheme today. What about adding a work in progress label that's different from waiting for author? Or do we feel like waiting for author?
What's the difference?
Well, basically, work in progress is it's not even close to being ready for review, or like it's not even in the review process yet. Whereas waiting for author is something that we're watching closely, and we're expecting it to soon go back to needs review.
To at least the way I was thinking of waiting for author means I don't need to look at this.
Okay.
Yeah, that was what I created that label for.
Yeah, that seems the worst.
So if calling it something else would help, but I don't think we need two labels that communicate that. I think if renaming it to work in progress, that's fine too.
No, I think waiting for author is better if we have.
Yeah, and we're
and then another is that when we are all subscribed to all of our repos, and we have most of the work is going on in our one repo, at mentioning Fernando or I is, I only seldom see that I've been at mentioned. I mean, like all of you, we all get many, many, many emails every day, and there's days where I am doing other things and I have no idea if I've been at mentioned, and the only email management scheme I have at that point is to delete everything in that folder or not read it. And so I'm wondering if we want, I mean, this is where it's unfortunate that GitHub doesn't have sort of multiple assignment for people and issues on pull requests. I'm wondering if we want to create labels to help Fernando and I see what things we should probably look at. When I'm traveling or Fernando's traveling, there's a lot of technical details that we probably don't need to look at, but then there's certain categories of things that, you know, it would be great to know about. I'm a little hesitant to use our actual names as labels. I was more thinking of broad categories that we might want to look at. So design, API review, architecture review. Those are the three main categories I can think of that sort of trigger my, you know, when I look at all of our pull requests, what do I do when I have a little bit of time? I go and find the pull requests that have those three categories of things. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, when at pinging is starting to work better for me because I took a pretty drastic step, which is that I actually removed myself. I unsubscribed from everything on GitHub, basically, is what I did. From everything. And that way, I turned everything off. And now, when I get at mentioned, it's the only thing that shows up on my queue. So as of recently, at pinging began working for me again, in the sense that I just took this drastic step of turning everything off on GitHub, everything. So I don't know, Brian, if maybe you want to. It is a bit of a brute force approach, but it had the advantage that now when people ping me, I actually go and respond. Yeah. It means that I only respond when I get pinged, but that was the reality. That had become the reality, that I'm on so many repos and on so many things that honestly the flood of automatic notifications had become useless. So I just nuked them all. I deleted everything. And
Yeah, I feel like I'm
yeah, it's a little brutal.
I'm bipolar in the sense that I have periods of time where I feel like I really look through things manually and I'm staying up with things.
Do all the things.
And then there's other times where your approach would work, and I don't know.
I mean, I realized that basically the automatic flood had become useless, and I was already ignoring effectively everything. So that's the approach that I took, and honestly, it is working because now when people ping me, I actually do go and reply.
Okay. And then I was also thinking about minimally for design review something that would give Adrian a trigger to look at things as well.
No, but and by the way, I was mentioning that just for you, but that is orthogonal to the question of these. I actually think these high-level labels could be useful. So
Okay.
I didn't mean to say that this was instead of what you were proposing. It was just a side comment, but I do agree with that idea.
No, I think your solution is better than creating a label, FDO label, Brian.
Yeah.
Like if yeah.
So yeah, I think a couple of those high-level labels for kind of design and architecture are probably a good idea, and we can keep an eye on those and create. The thing is with those labels, it's easy to create bookmarks or whatever that give you that view quickly for any of us personally. So, yeah.
Okay. I'll create a few of the. Are there any other sort of broad categories other than design, API, and architecture that we need?
No.
Let's go with that for now.
Okay. And then another question is trying to help us. Again, it's around this broad idea of helping each of us know sort of what we need to pay attention to. Eventually, when we have separate repos, there's going to be some very natural divisions, right? We'll actually be able to follow particular repos where maybe the IPython kernel is, or the notebook front end, or the various things are. Do we want? I mean, we sort of have some of these categories already, like HTML notebook, widgets. Do we want to use labels like that to help us start to identify the logical areas that we will eventually split the project into in terms of repos, sort of?
I think it's a little bit of premature optimization. I sort of have the feeling that that split is something we should tackle mostly directed by looking at what we can do with the code. I mean, to some extent, this is going to have to be done the ugly way. Not the nice way where we break up nicely in terms of ideas and concepts, but the ugly way, which is we have to look at what we can do with the code and how to keep the code working and not break it. So I think this would be a little bit of a waste of time, and we're just going to have to bite that bullet unpleasantly, the nasty way, which is block a week or two sometime, probably late fall or early spring, and not do anything else other than dig into that thing and start cutting it up.
Yeah.
It's kind of a little bit like what you did.
Utils are going to be the hardest part.
What's
Yeah,
that? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. Could you repeat?
The utils are going to be the hardest part.
Yeah, all that stuff, and I think one of those things, we need to do the ugly part first, and once we've dismantled the pieces, then we can do the organization and clean up and labeling. But I just don't think there's a way around that one. Okay, I need to run, folks. I'll see you all soon. Bye.
Bye, Fernando.
Bye, Fernando.
Hey, quick question. It's telling me that if I quit, it ends broadcast. Why? I didn't start this thing.
Oh, because it doesn't know that you're both signed in as IPython.
Okay, it's giving me
the wrong account.
Okay, I think I can continue broadcast. Hopefully this won't kill it. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. We can also stop now.
I can't leave. Okay, well,
Well,
I'll turn my camera and my mic off, and somebody else can kill it. Okay.
All right. Yeah. Note to folks, if you're not starting the meeting, don't log in as IPython.
Well, Fernando doesn't hear you now. So.
Yeah, half the meeting is logged in as the same account right now. So.
Oh, funny.
Okay.
Do we want to keep going?
Are we plugging on? I would not mind.
Probably, yeah, it might be related to that is why people aren't getting invites, because we invite you, not IPython.
Yeah, that's probably so. Yeah, Fernando said he heard a notification but didn't see an invite because I didn't invite the IPython account and he was not logged in as himself.
Do we want to keep going, or?
I don't really.
I know, I'm tired. All right, why don't we go ahead and kill it then?
Okay. All right.
After all, now that Fernando will think we just kept going for hours, but
yeah,
we're really not.
Yeah.
Okay, please do go and look at those PRs
that
are on the rest of it, because we really should try and get our PR total down a little bit.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, bye, Internet.
Bye, Internet.
Bye.
Bye, James.
Hey,
Bye, Andrew.
bye.